Hey, welcome to the Black Cat Lounge. Sorry about that, guys. Listen, we just had some severe weather that actually came through, and my wife just says I'm out of practice in the chat room. No, I am not. We had a jump in the internet. So anyway, welcome to the Black Cat Lounge. We're gonna have a great show tonight. Real quickly though, I want to thank everybody that stopped in at the unbelievable Saginaw, Michigan premiere of The Haunting on Adam Street, Steve Shippey's project, and it was phenomenal. And I can't believe so many people actually came out. I mean, we had, I believe the Temple Theater holds like 2,000 people, and he had roughly right about 1,800 pre-sold tickets, and I think he sold the rest at the door. It was really a great thing. And and my Miss Aida and myself were all part of it, and we all had it was just a wonderful time. So it was a wonderful trip, and I've got to thank everybody for hanging out there and being as cool as they were. And also I want to thank everybody who sent me birthday wishes. Yes, I'm old. I have that Medicare card, and no, I'm not joining AARP only unless I can get like discounts going into like haunted stuff. That otherwise, forget it. I'm not joining it. But anyway, tonight we have a fantastic guest. I'll be honest with you. I've been a fan for quite a while. I first saw her on Instagram, which was amazing. And then of course, I mean TikTok and all that. But she is an influencer. She is an experiencer. She is someone who goes out there and really does hardcore wandering, and I think it's phenomenal. We're going to talk a lot about her, and I want to just, well, how can I describe her? Beckie is a para experiencer. That's number one, first and foremost. Two, Beckie is an urban explorer. Beckie is an investigator. And Beckie happens to, well, she is a mortuary specialist. And I like to say specialist because that is a field of study in which you give dignity back to the remains of a human being. And I think it's a wonderful thing. So, without further ado, because we had that little bang, that little screw up there. Please, everybody, welcome Becki-Ann Galentine. She's just a great person, and I mean, you guys are going to go crazy. Hey, Beck, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God! Let me. You know what? I think the ethers were conspiring that instead of when two of us are in the proximate area, even though it may be internet, we never know what happens. So. It was great. Beck, I right off the bat, I have to ask you something. How does your job mesh with what you do outside of work? And the reason I'm asking this is because a lot of people will go and they'll be like, well, doesn't she get enough of maybe that other side of life, that the thing that we're hidden from, where you're exposed to it all the time? What is it that is there something there that, like, what is it that attracts you?
So I actually talk about this a lot. The mortuary field is very conservative.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, anyone representing the field is not going to talk about the afterlife. They're only going to talk about death, and anyone who kind of deviates from that is seen as potentially complicating grief with the families that they're working with. And I understand that to an extent, but I was in mortuary school when I first spoke with a medium who I had a really incredible experience with. I went to mortuary school after my friend passed away, and I had experiences before, but this whole thing that I've been going through is kind of like a very organic journey of my perception of the afterlife. So when my friend died, I was like, there's nothing else. Like, this is the end of the world. And I remember walking in to see a medium for the first time, and she looked at me and she was like, I see someone around you with blue hair. And my friend had blue hair. I don't think you would look at me and automatically just assume that I have a friend who recently passed away that I was looking to talk about, who had blue hair. So for me, I found value in that. It didn't make me have any more complications with grief. It didn't make me want to bring her back. It didn't make me get obsessed with wanting to speak to her. It just gave me this um, feeling that was just like a confirmation of there's something more. So along the journey, I started looking back at some other experiences I had had. And while I was in mortuary school, one thing that I always found interesting was that the people who were instructing us, or any people that I worked with while I was kind of learning the trade, they were saying things like they had ghost stories, or there's certain places that they won't go to because they give them this vibe, or they saw a full body apparition in their funeral home. And I'm like, this is a huge contradiction to what we are kind of putting out openly with the families. And I understand the separation between the two, but at the same time, I also think they kind of blend very well together.
I have to agree with you. And it is funny because and you'll understand this. We have a family mortuary that we go to, where we always, somebody passes away, we always go there. And one day we finally asked our friend, has there ever been anything that scared you? Is there anything that made you uneasy? And he said that one time when they went to pick up the remains, that he and his father entered a room and they were preparing to bag the remains. All of a sudden, this huge bright light appeared. It was just totally amazing. And it just like blinded them. And they were just amazed by it. But a lot of people don't realize that it's more commonplace, like you said, than what people feel and what people think. I got to ask you right off the bat, your personal experiences. Have you had them while you were at work? Have you ever experienced anything while you were at work?
No, and I think that's often because human remains are not equated with the spirit. Like,
Right.
I don't think that there's that direct correlation between the two. And there have been times where I've been on a house call and, the person is surrounded by all of their belongings, and you can feel like a presence in that way. And I didn't feel that every time, especially when I was going to like nursing homes or hospitals. But I think of one house in particular where that person was there their entire life. And I knew, hi, Toby. I knew that if, I picked up their remains, that it had nothing to do with that person's presence. Like, they're not coming with me. So I never had anything like that. Even while I was working there were coworkers that were like, hey, this certain area of the funeral home, but I never felt anything like that. And I believe everyone's experience is different.
Okay. Next question, logical question. Where was your very first experience? Because, I'm going to be honest with you. If you have a negative experience, you'll never go back. You'll never work with it. Obviously, whatever it was profound, but also was very interesting to you. So that's what kind of hooked you in. What was that?
So in 2009, as kind of not, I wouldn't want to call it a joke because it wasn't making a mockery of it, but it was close to Halloween. And I knew people did like ghost hunting or paranormal
Hmm.
investigations. So my family's really big into Halloween and spooky things. So we didn't think of it from an ethical standpoint. And now I have like a strong compass for ethics because I think about things with my mortuary lens and, the way the afterlife is represented. So I don't want to seem like
Hmm.
this is me today. So I said, let's go ghost hunting. And we thought we would go to the cemetery up the road. And we walked. And I feel like this created the ability for it to happen a little bit. The anticipation of not driving to a location and getting instant gratification, but we actually walked a mile. It was my brother and my partner at the time. And we walked to the cemetery, and we only had a flashlight, a point and shoot camera, and our cell phones. And we sat there and we were taking pictures and recording. And after about 15 minutes, we were kind of like, this is silly. Like, I can't even believe I thought that anything could happen, especially the first time. I didn't know it was all about patience. So we turned off the flashlight, we turned off the camera, we turned off our phones, and we were like, that's it, like, time to go home. And that's when, out of the corner of my eye, I just saw something in the sky. And the sky was like that twilight color. And there was this bright aqua blue sphere. And it just gracefully went in between two trees. And I was like, guys, did you see that? Like, I've never seen anything like that in my life. I can't even believe something actually happened with this little, trip that we took up the road on a whim. And they were like, Beckie, be quiet. Now, I would be able to write this off as ball lightning if it weren't for the fact that it had the chance to hover for about 15 seconds in between those two trees while my partner and I were standing on the ground. And I said it was right up there. And then, I cannot believe this happened, but it changed directions and it came down. It didn't shine on a surface. So it was this free floating sphere of this aqua blue color. And I remember it was almost as if like time and the wind and everything just stood still. It was like this still moment. And we're like, what's going to happen? Like, is this going to enter our bodies? Like, what's going on? So it came in between my partner and I, and we jumped in opposite directions. So maybe if I were alone, I would have been like, I imagine that. But because it happened and two of us actually jumped, it was that confirmation for me that was like, this is real. So the next day, I was actually pursuing biology at the time, and I was taking like chemistry labs. And I walked into one of my science classes, and I said to the professor, and I said, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And I know I had like this smug look on my face. I was like, "I know something you don't." And he was like, "No." That made me lose faith in what I was studying, to be honest. And I was trying to maintain my studies as like basically medical biology was what I was studying. And at the same time, every single day on the weeknights, my friend Tanya and another group of people, we were trying to recreate this experience. And it didn't happen for a long time afterwards, but I was hooked on it. I was showing up to class with like a Red Bull in hand. I was late. I was falling asleep. I was out until 3 o'clock in the morning going to any place. And I started hearing about places that were too dangerous to go. And that was where I started getting my first perceptions of the paranormal. Now, I will say when I had that first experience, I was frightened. I didn't know what it was. And it wasn't until I started really like immersing myself a little bit more into the field that I'm like, wait a minute. I have a familial connection to that cemetery, and a family tragedy occurred just yards from that cemetery. And I was like, what if that was someone saying hi? It had nothing to do with the cemetery potentially. So I'm hoping that this year in October, when it's around that, I had time stamped it when it first happened. I'm hoping to maybe recreate that for the first time because I never really reopened that in a way from like a paranormal standpoint where it's like, I want to do this in a research way. So that's what got me hooked on it. As I start to think backwards into my childhood and growing up, I'm remembering things that I'm like, for example, when I was like 3 or 4 years old, I was sitting in the kitchen and this blue light came in the kitchen and I thought it was lightning, but lightning doesn't come in the house, but it zapped the kitchen door, like the cabinet door shut. And I remember watching it with my eyes and I was just a little kid. And I was like, Mom, lightning came in the house and shut the door. So now I'm realizing this has been happening to me my whole life, but I didn't know how to perceive it or categorize it. So yeah, that's kind of my journey to my first experience.
Next logical question. Do you consider yourself a sensitive, a psychic, a medium? You're an experiencer. There's no doubt about it. But do you feel that deep down inside you have something that may attract you to this phenomena?
So I don't label myself as anything like that. I will say I think we're all a little bit psychic. And I go back to this one specific moment when I was in 8th grade. And I don't know why I said this, but things like this happen my whole life. When I was in 8th grade, I was with my best friend, Rachel, and we were sitting there at a little table. It was a kid's table. Like it wasn't even one we were supposed to be sitting at as teenagers. And we were playing chess. And I said, my brother's going to get into an accident tonight. And that night, my brother got into a car accident that kind of threw my family off the course for about a decade. And I always think back to why did I say that? When I started opening up to my mom, she shares that she has also had these. So I don't know definitively how to say one thing or the other, but that is kind of, something that I believe that I'm sensitive to.
I think many of us are, well, all of us are, we have an ability up to a point. And then sometimes it just takes the right place at the right time in order to go and open that door so that you can experience what's going on. Uh, you, I think, are very, very predispositioned to it. And without a doubt, you're one of those people that highly, you know what? I remember talking to you when I first met you and went, wow, she's highly clairsentient. And it's just a natural thing for you to be able to go and see this stuff and experience this stuff. So you're one of the fortunate ones that don't have to come to my class. You know, you're one of those fortunate ones that don't have to be trained. And that's a gift right there. Not, that's just a gift with you. Now, I, here's something somebody asked me when I announced that you're going to be in the show. They said, "Oh, it's that goth girl." And goth, it was in quotation marks. Do you consider yourself a goth person because of the fact that, well, goth is like a total subculture. It's a whole way of living. I know I have goth friends that in the morning they wake up and put on their Doc Martens and they put on their black socks and black jeans and they're they're all their chains and everything, and they live that life. When I see you, I mean, you're and I don't want to say spooky because that's like Disney-fying it. You're a person that has like a sense of a sense of fashion that might be a little bit more darker, perhaps. But do you consider yourself uh and let me just a trendsetter when it comes to your fashion? Because again, anybody that has seen Becky's phenomenal TikToks and Instagrams, you will automatically see that she has a sense of style that many of us would love to walk around in at Halloween or whatever. So what do you consider yourself?
So, first, I'll say that my TikToks that I share don't typically show myself or what I look like in them, and that is with intent because my storytelling is about the people who lived and their stories, and my investigation is about their stories and the history that I share. And I never wanted my presence, because obviously I do like to dress a certain way, to overpower stories that aren't mine, especially when I'm talking about detailed stories of grief. So the way I dress is just, it's fun. It makes me happy. But at the same time, I wouldn't consider, like, I like goth music. 80s goth, like 80s new wave post punk goth music is my favorite genre of music. I like going to goth nights. I like going to like punk shows. And that is my experience. That's who I was growing up. And I do realize that the way you dress has nothing to do with who you are as a person. But the way I dress on social media and the way I'm dressed right now, it's part of like the social media presence. And to the people who can't separate my intelligence or research from something because they feel like it's not serious or I'm making a mockery of something, that I wouldn't expect them to. I think it takes people with an open mind to be able to perceive that. And I think that's what the paranormal field is all about. So for someone to say that I was just a goth, that you can't put things into boxes like that.
I have to agree 100%. 100%, because we all come in all different full shapes, sizes, colors. We all have different senses of doing things. We all are individuals, and that is the way it should be. I have to tell you, you have a great now you have an unbelievable eye for cemeteries. What is it about cemeteries? Now, and let me just tell you, preface that I'm a cemetery guy. I love going through cemeteries. I love being able to go and you know try to find out and try to research and read and understand who is buried there, the lives that they lived, to sometimes bring that forward. Even in my books, I've always tried to go and I always felt the history was far more important than the EVP that we may collect.
Mhm.
What is it about cemeteries for you that draws you so often to them?
Not to sound edgy because this is absolutely not how I got into it, but the cemetery has been my home since I was probably 14. This is not something I did because it's trendy. Cemeteries have been, I would say, like, uncool for a little bit. Like when I started going, people thought it was strange, and now it's more popularized, especially with the presence on social media and people realizing there's more than just a bunch of old marble headstones about people who don't have any living relatives. So when I was 14 years old, my parents would go to this big moose picnic. And I remember the first time it happened. So it would be like the local people who were kind of into country music and not really people I identified with. And then my friend from school who was also into similar music was like, there's a cemetery up in the hills. So everyone would be drinking, and I started hanging out in the cemetery. Now that was my first familiarization with the cemetery. It was small, and I remember the graves. I saw photos with those graves. And it's crazy to think that there were people who had lived over 100 years before me, and I was hanging out with them for that long. So that started the interest. And then I guess as I grew, it always became like a sanctuary to me. So
Exactly.
when I started getting into photography really heavily, it was a place I could go to practice my photography, to have something interesting to look at without judgment, without anyone really being around to, say, oh, who does she think she is because she's a photographer, or she thinks she knows what she's doing. And with that became familiarity, became an interest in the esoteric symbols that are on these graves, the stories. And I've actually taken classes on it at this point because I do want to do the work. And I think that it's very important to acknowledge it. It's a lost art. Cremation is over 50% at this point.
Right.
More and more people are opting for that. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but these cemeteries, they're falling into disrepair. One thing that's happened since people have started telling these stories and sharing this stuff, and it's become more of a taphophile community on social media, people have started to want to put work into preserving them. I just mentioned one on TikTok. It has 700,000 views. That's 700,000 people that are now looking at a once abandoned cemetery and having interest into maybe the right eye will see it and say, I want to give money to these people. I want to help. I want to volunteer. So to me, what I do, as much as people think it's out of vanity, I want to see that happening. So for me, yeah, it's about the story. I don't care if a grave is famous or not. I don't care if it's the most ornate grave in the world. Every single monument is someone's. And that's one thing I think that goes, and people don't really care about, like the old field stones. And it's like, that took someone all day to hand carve that. And, it might not look as interesting as the other ones, but that's what they could do. And same with the wooden ones. Some of them, very few of them survived. And I think it's just like a big part of our history. It was some of the first art that people were exposed to in this country.
Exactly.
These were like art galleries. And I think it also says a lot because you can make artwork about, love and all these other things, but artwork made in the name of grief, artwork directed by someone's grief, is some of the most intimate artwork out there. And that's why I'm interested in it.
I have to say that it's watching your videos, you give a voice back to those who have passed. And that, I think, is more important than anything else. And vanity, I've never pegged you as a vain person. I never, ever pegged you as that. You've always been someone, as far as I've seen on your videos, that go and you try to give that humanity back. And that's what so many people, that's why a lot of these paranormal shows, they don't do. They don't bring the humanity back to people. They just kind of like let it go. And I know that's a commercial thing. And I know that, that the sponsors are what's continuing these shows onward. But it's a shame because so much of it out there is so just looked over and forgotten. And I think that's the biggest shame of all, that these people who had lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago, now just lie forgotten. Now, we talked off air about something that you really have a passion for. I'd love to, let's talk about that because fortunately, I mean, I've been able to go and know many. I got a chance to meet and talk with like the late Warren Sky, who was the traditional Seneca pine tree chief. I got a chance to work with with different flint knappers and stone tool makers and traditionalists on some of the reservations up here. And we talk, and also we talked about the forgotten African American sites and graves, and the disrespect that has been given to the remains of these noble people. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I find that totally refreshing, fascinating, and you know what, I think you've really kind of put your finger on a hot topic that is so forgotten and not looked at.
So this is starting to come up more in communities, but my first experience exploring this topic goes back to the Man Fortune, which takes place in Waterbury, Connecticut. Now, there was a time where people who were enslaved, and I always try to make the note to say these were humans. These were not just slaves. A lot of people just like to, I know I don't like the
Right.
word police, but at the same time, these were human beings who were enslaved. And there was someone who was enslaved. And at the time, it was illegal to desecrate a human body. However, if it was someone who was enslaved, they could do whatever they wanted post-mortem. And so a lot of these people, their remains were lost in history. They had things built over their graves. And so Fortune, he was enslaved by a doctor, and he was out. He had been working with a broken back already, and he was out by the water, and he slipped and fell and broke his neck. He actually had a wife, and he had kids, and he was a human being. And the doctor defleshed him and boiled his remains. He did not get a funeral, and used these remains to pass them through privileged hands so more people, more white people, could become doctors. So it went through his family, and they all continued to live this privileged life at, again, the expense of someone who didn't even get to live their life that they were meant to. And his remains passed through these doctors' hands for many years until they reached a museum who put them on display with what they noted as slave tools. And from the 70s, they actually made postcards with these remains. And he still did not get his dignity until fairly recently. And what they did is they gave him a headstone and a burial in Waterbury, Connecticut. So that was the first story that got me interested. Now, I could go all day on these stories. When I do tell these stories, I obviously have monetized views, so I take whatever proceeds. And even if there's not enough to make a decent donation, I will either match or make greater a donation towards the communities that were harmed by these injustices, because we are so fortunate to have, I can go to my second great grandma's grave, and there are people who can't. And that was the first one. So I donated the proceeds of that to Black Girls Code, and I've advocated, and it made me interested. And I have found so many similar stories. And I do want to share one that is the most moving, or one of the worst ones that I've ever heard, which is Minnick Wallace, who was Inuit, and he lived in Greenland with his family. And Admiral Perry, who actually has a highway named after him where I'm from in Pittsburgh, that's the first time I had heard the name. And he had been trying to reach Antarctica, but he ended up in Greenland, and he found these indigenous people, and he asked, can you come back to America? We're going to let you see it for a year. He thought that they were so valuable as like specimens. He told them, you're just going to come here for a year. We're going to have scientists check you out. You're going to live it up. And what they did with Minnick, his father, and 6 or 7 other people is that he put them on display at a museum in New York. And so they had these this culture on display far away from home, and they all ended up getting sick with tuberculosis. And Minnick's father actually passed away. So Minnick was 8 years old, and his father passed away. And they thought, these remains are so valuable for research that we can't possibly just discard them and bury them in the ground now that they're here. So they gave Minnick's father a fake funeral. They put rocks in a coffin and buried them. So this is someone who's already traumatized by this situation. And he thought his dad was buried until he went to school. The person who tricked him was actually the person who ended up adopting him. He was related to the museum. He ended up adopting him. He's in school and kids start making fun of him. They said, your dad's skeleton is on display at this museum. And Minnick went to him and was like, you tricked me, blah, 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 and like realized what had been going on. Now, he went home in his, I want to say later 20s, and he tried to like return to his original culture, but he had lost his language. He had lost his ability to hunt and live the lifestyle that he was meant to grow up in because of the selfishness of white people. And he came back here at the age of 28, and he ended up getting the Spanish flu and dying. So it was really just misfortune from start to the end. So his grave is actually in New Hampshire. They put a little small wooden carved fisherman on his grave, and it's kind of, you know, falling apart now. But that's the first grave that I walked up to, and I just was crying. And the proceeds from that video I ended up donating to a center for Indigenous women and children in Canada. And again, the same or the closest community I could find that was similar to what he lived. But the fact that we saw remains as less than, especially when certain religions put so much value on human remains, and these funerals for all these people are so grand. And the fact that we denied people that, we denied people even the chance to memorialize people the way that they were meant to be, is something that I've grown to be very passionate about.
I know so well in many of the anthropological and archaeological people that I've worked with over the years, that the repatriation of remains is a hot button problem. And I also know that I've seen so many, indigenous burial mounds, Native American burial mounds that have been desecrated, have been looted. I've seen I've seen where now back, you're young, but I'll tell you, back in the 1960s, they used to have magazines, Wild West magazines, where they had remains, Native American remains, in a lucite coffee table in somebody's living room, followed, with all the different grave goods that they had, and it really, when you think about it, the white incursion went and was to stomp out any, both African American and Native American, any semblance of their own traditions, their own past lives. Now, by enforcing Catholicism and enforcing Christianity on them, you would think that now they would respect these people's bodies. They would respect these remains. And it wasn't so. And you see it time and time again. And I mean, we're not talking about the resurrectionists. We're not talking about, people who went out there to go and, provide remains, however nefarious they might be, but we're talking about human beings that were cannibalized. Basically, that's what they were. I mean, dissected, and they were just, and many times they were put in freak shows, and the dime museums all had rooms full of skeletons. And I think it's so important what you're doing now is to bring some kind of light onto a subject that is literally hidden to other people other than, those of us who may, have one foot in different cultures. So that's kudos to you. I think that's a phenomenal thing you're doing. Now, in what you're doing with that, have you had a lot of blowback from it? Have you had a lot of people where they were like, no, why are you doing this? Maybe we should just let sleeping dogs lie.
Honestly, not really. I'll say that the engagement on these videos, the willingness of people to care, I think some people just scroll past and they don't want to hear it. But there have been, and the thing is, I don't ever want to profit from it, obviously, but I still say that even talking about these subjects does gain me some respect in communities. And most of those communities are thanking me. They're saying, thank you for being a responsible colonizer. And that's minimal. Like, I could be doing way more, and I hope to be doing way more in the future. But I don't think anyone has I don't think I've ever had a negative comment. I think most people genuinely don't know. And ignorance isn't an excuse. I think people should be taking the time to be following Indigenous creators and creators of color and trying to diversify their feed, because how many people do you know they only follow white voices in these fields? And
Oh my God, yeah.
I think that I'm trying to do that and inspire other people to listen to it, because once they hear, they're like, oh, they might hear more. And I have seen people who have said, I was inspired by this person's video to go visit this person or talk about this or incorporate it into their study in some way. And, actually going back to what you were saying, like the Christianization or the forced Christianity on these people, there's another one in Connecticut that was really eye-opening for me. And it's Anne Cornelius is the name on her grave. And it says an Indian girl. And this was one that really a lot of Indigenous people came forward and said, thank you for talking about this. Now, there's no record of what community she belonged to, what her real name was, just a grave that was buried outside in the cemetery, which is actually more than a lot of people were afforded. But they made sure she was buried away from the white people. She actually got a nicer place than all the white people's graves because she has a nice little shaded area in the forest. But it says Anne Cornelius, not Anne, a Indian girl. And I just think about that. And Yale actually wanted to exhume her and see if there were any artifacts, which it's just funny how we pick and choose what we choose to desecrate. So yeah, it seems like
It's true.
people aren't even thanking me, but they're feeling like I'm using my voice the way it should be. And it's, I guess, the bare minimum.
No, I don't think it's a bare minimum, Deck. Becky, I think that you're bringing that candle. You started, you know what? You lit the candle and you're illuminating a long lying problem. And that's where people need to be able to go and have people like you that will crusade for it. And people, in this day and age, I hate to say it, but I mean, you know, as a society, I think we've become very, very complacent. We're overwhelmed, as well as I do. We are overwhelmed by everything that's going on in the world. We're overwhelmed by everything that's going on in our country and all the politics and all the other stuff that we're not going to get into tonight. But uh, people need to take that breath and understand what history was about. I mean, I was not taught history in a correct way. It wasn't until, much later that I opened my eyes to what true history was. And people need to do that. People need to, I think if people saw what true history was, we wouldn't have a lot of the social problems that we have nowadays. There would be a little bit more respect, but unfortunately, it's we're the victors write the history, unfortunately, and that's the biggest problem. And those who are out there like yourself bringing light to these topics become the radicals. And sometimes it takes a radical in order to force change and open people's eyes. And that is what you're doing. A great job. Fantastic job with that. If there's one thing that I would love to see you be so successful at, is this. Outside of you just being an inspiration and an influencer, but I think this is so important. And when we talked about it off the air, it's like it really tugged at my heartstrings because of the fact that I know and I've seen and I've gone through the museums and I've this is not somebody that donated their body to be turned into a plastic specimen. This is not somebody who they picked up and they throw them in like a sideshow museum, or even if you go to your local museum where they have mummies, they're just hanging out there.
Yep.
People don't realize that this is a desecration rather than anything else. This is not a respectful thing. And I think that's a huge part of it. And I think the paranormal community needs to kind of go and open their eyes. They can't just be running around with meters. I think they should be a little bit more active in some kind of like social topics, just such as this, because you want to talk to the dead. Why don't we show a little respect to the dead?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is something that is really something that's hot.
I try
Now,
not to pass judgment, but I will say that I find it highly suspect when people immerse themselves very heavily in history, particularly in New England colonies, and
mhm.
they're interested in, let's say, for example, the witch trials, and they'll talk about the persecution of white witches, but they don't acknowledge the Haitian witches that
All
were,
right.
and they also they have this high interest in the persecution of marginalized communities, but then they fail to acknowledge the other things. It's like these white tears
Truth.
are so much more powerful and interesting to them than these other communities.
I think it's the fault of our education system. I
Mhm.
think it's a fault of old white men back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s that decided that this is going to be the curriculum. I feel that it goes back even to the Southern apologists. We talk about after the American Civil War, and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and all this propaganda that fulfilled a white destiny.
Yep.
And I have a problem with that. And I also have a problem with publishers who refuse to go and publish books by indigenous and African American scholars who go and open the door. It's like they're afraid that by picking the scab, they're going to go and they're going to create something that will not be a success on their bookshelves. And that to me is a sin, because without the proper education, without having people that are out there to go and pick at that scab and put a truthful rendition of whatever out there, we'll never learn, and this society will never change. And it's so funny, we're kind of off the topic a little bit, but it all works together, and that's what's so important. People need to understand that everything works hand in hand, whether it's paranormal, whether it's spiritual, whatever. Everything has to work hand in hand. And to me, it's a shame that more people aren't looking through your eyes. But I think that the people that you attract and you influence, I think you're doing a hell of a job doing it. And I'm really hoping that everything, everything is going to go and be successful. And it's so wonderful and so refreshing to talk to somebody who has something more of an agenda than just walking through a cemetery, just hanging out with Annabelle, or you actually have a cause, and I am so impressed by that. I really am. Really, that's amazing. But wait a minute, we're already getting towards the end of the show, and I'm going to apologize because we did have a little problem in the beginning. Uh, how can people watch you? Where can they find you? How can they contact you? This is all important because I mean, you have a voice that needs to be heard.
So I appear on Instagram and TikTok, so mainly social media platforms, and I'm starting to move towards Facebook as well because I'm trying to just exist on all these platforms. But right now, my main thing that I'm using are those social media platforms under the name My
Mhm.
Bloody Valentine. Other than that, I just kind of appear in places without being planned. So I'll pop up every now and again on podcasts and stuff.
Everybody, seriously, check check her out, watch her, and she really does a beautiful job. And I also have to tell you something. You know what? I'm a social media geek. I'm addicted. I'll come right out and say it. You have like such respect for everywhere you go. I think that's insane. People don't get that. I'm so used to like people just walking through a cemetery and stomping on just graves, not caring where they're walking, not caring about the stories, what's going on, not caring about anything, but looking for the well, somebody's got to talk to me. Talk to me. You actually go out there and it's so beautiful the way. And I don't want to use the word choreographed because that's not what you do, but I think it's an intrinsic choreography that you have when you are in these different locations. I did have one question that came in while we were talking. What do you fear the most?
Humans. I always say this: humans and coyotes. That's
Well,
it.
I fear humans a lot more than I do coyotes.
Those are the two things, in the past several years that I've encountered where if I hear the coyotes outside of a haunted location, that's just like my automatic answer now. And I've been like, oh, the coyotes are out. I'm going to be a little cautious. And then, yeah, humans. That's the only negative I've had. I've had like the most incredible journey and experiences that have like moved me, made me cry. I felt humbled that I can tell these stories and be heard and taking the time, like sitting there, taking the time and deciding how I'm going to present the story to be as respectful as possible to the life that was lived and how the person might want their voice heard in some way. And sometimes even rewriting what has been shared, because there have been times where I've read a story. I'm like, why are they saying it like this? And, that has meant a lot to me, but the only negative I've had comes from humans. Urbexing, there might be someone who's got bad intentions lingering. There's people who are jealous or people who criticize every intention. And, for being the community that we are and having the open minds that we're supposed to have, it's wild to me how much people refuse change or seeing things from a different perspective.
Change is hard. Change is hard. I look at my generation and I think to myself, I'm an anomaly sometimes in my generation because I look at change. I crave change, but so many in my generation, it is they put blinders on and they become intrinsically myopic, and that is where it really, I want to go and I want to shake people, but you're never going to shake people until they want to open their eyes, until they want to do it. So I'm just so happy that you're influencing a new generation of people to what is important in our lives, and I think that's phenomenal. Last question, Ms. Beck, you ready for this one? This is one I always like to ask, like my favorite guests and people who I respect. You ready for this one?
Oh boy.
It's not that bad. What would you like as an epitaph on your own stone?
Oh boy. I've thought about this a lot, and I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I would hope that someone would write it for me, I guess, because again, this whole time, like I don't show my face in my videos. I like my presence to speak for myself and what people are experiencing. And obviously, the way I see myself is not how everyone else is going to see me. So I would hope that the people in charge of it, if I do have a headstone someday, which I think even if it's not common in the future when I pass, I think people are still going to make sure I get one because I'm just one of those people. But I really don't know what I would want it to say. And I think that's common. I think the families choose it. And there have been some, there's one in Massachusetts that's like, curse this town of Whalingport and damn all the people who helped me. And I love it because I'm like, man, she did choose hers because her neighbors did her dirty. But I just really haven't decided one for myself.
It's funny because I was asked that on a podcast not too long ago, and I had to sit there and think for a couple seconds. And even though I asked that question, I never kind of put it in perspective. You know what I just want to have? He was a nice guy. That's it. That's all I want. He was a nice guy. Not he was did this or did that or medium or spiritualist minister or any of that stuff. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. He was just a nice guy, and that is good enough.
Yeah.
Beck, please, thank you so much for being on. Just stay on a couple seconds so I can thank you properly off the air. And I have to tell you that this has been an absolute honor to have you on. And it just feels so good to have somebody that has such a refreshing view of so many subjects, so many topics that are so meaningful. And everybody out there, you guys have got to go and be a fan. I'm a fanboy. Yes, I can be a fanboy. I can't wait till she comes out with autograph 8x10s because I will stand in line and I will buy one and I will put her on my wall of fame. So anyway, Beck, I'll be right back in just a few seconds. Thank you again so much from the bottom of my heart. It's an honor for you to be on. Thank you. Hey, now Beckie is phenomenal, isn't she? Beckie is she's such a breath of fresh air. It was so wonderful to have her on and to hear her stories and what she's all about. And that to me is a hallmark of a person who is a great person and just a wonderful person. And people have to, I just wish more people would become like Beckie. I really do. And she should be more than just I won't call her an influencer anymore. I'm going to call her an internet inspiration. That's what I'm going to call her, because I do think that she is thinking so beyond the box, and I just love every minute of it. So anyway, guys, listen, I want to just send a lot of healing out to prayers and healing out to those who need it. There's been quite a few people who have been sick, and some people who are going under the knife, and I really hope that everything goes well with them. I want to thank everybody again, everybody from Saginaw, Michigan, that came by, and it was just an honor to meet each and every one of you. And I want to thank everybody that is tuned in tonight. So, guys, be good. Just remember this. Life is a lot bigger than just you. Life is so much bigger. Strive to learn every day. Strive for peace, guys. Strive for peace. Until next week, take care. This is Tim Shaw at Where Else? The Black Cat Lounge, where the elite meet next to the dumpster transfer station right over here. And we'll see you next week, Tuesday. Blessings to everybody. Thank you so much. You guys are just fantastic. Ciao, babies. Bye-bye.